You're not wearing the crown, not yet. But everyone already knows your name. You're the second daughter of a king who couldn't keep his wives or his sons. Your mother was executed. Your birth was declared illegitimate. You're a Protestant in a country unsure what religion it even wants to be, and most nobles assume you'll end your life in exile or worse. But you're watching, listening, waiting. It is the early 16th century, and you are Elizabeth Tudor, an overlooked daughter of Henry VIII, marked more by scandal than succession. Your future is uncertain, and every step forward could be a misstep into treason. You begin your days with tutors who whisper Latin into your ear as if it's a code for survival, which it is. You memorise rhetoric, devour history, and learn how men think. This isn't idle learning. These are tools, and you understand their use better than your instructors realise. Because you are a girl in a world that wants only boys in power, your very education is an act of defiance. Your half-sister Mary, crowned before you, watches you carefully. She remembers your mother Anne Boleyn. So does the court. So does the scaffold. Every morning a servant checks your chamber for letters that shouldn't be there. You've already learned that words can be as dangerous as blades. A single phrase misheard, heir, heretic, hope, can land you in the tower, and eventually it does. You're 21 when you're imprisoned. They bring you to the Tower of London during a rainstorm, soaked and silent. You don't weep. You know the stories of women who cried and begged and vanished. You walk forward. The rain, the stones, the grey sky. This is where your mother died. And now they might kill you here too. But you survive. They interrogate you over plots you didn't plan and names you didn't speak. You learn how silence is a weapon. How absence of guilt is not the same as proof of innocence. You hold your composure because you know. Even your enemies are uncertain what you'll become. It isn't just your bloodline that makes you dangerous. It's that no one can read you. When Queen Mary finally dies, your name echoes down palace halls, across battlefields, through the mouths of men who never thought they'd bow to a woman. You are crowned in Westminster Abbey on a cold January morning, your hair bright like fire, your robes stitched with Tudor roses and quiet vengeance. You're now Queen Elizabeth I, and suddenly Europe is terrified. Not because you wield armies, though you will. Not because you control trade, though you shall. But because no one, not even your advisors, understands what kind of queen you'll be. The Spanish ambassador writes home, she is a woman and therefore unstable. The Pope doesn't recognise your legitimacy. France mocks your virginity. And your own parliament asks you again and again when you'll marry. You offer them riddles instead of answers. It's not that you don't know the game. It's that you've decided to play a different one. You start with subtle defiance. You reject suitors with charming letters that say nothing. You fund explorers quietly, behind bureaucratic language. You allow Parliament to speak, and then overrule them when it matters. You host elaborate court dances where your eyes say more than your lips. And above all, you never marry, because marriage would mean sharing power, and you've waited too long, learned too much to give any of it away. Your face appears on coins. Your portraits grow taller, more elaborate, symbolic. Behind closed doors, you're calculating alliances. You negotiate with kings, pirates, scholars and spies. You've turned your court into a maze where foreign powers keep losing their way. You're not just ruling England. You are becoming its myth. By 1570, Pope Pius V has had enough. He excommunicates you publicly. It's a political move as much as a religious one, a signal to Catholic Europe that you're not just a heretic, but an enemy of God. Now, anyone who assassinates you will be doing heaven's work. The threat is no longer whispered, it's declared. But still, you remain alive. And not just alive, untouchable. You read the papal bull, then write a speech for Parliament declaring England free from foreign interference. The people cheer. Parliament cheers. But it's more than that. You've just drawn a line between England and Rome, between past and future, between obedience and sovereignty. Every decision you make from this point forward is dangerous, not because you're reckless, but because you know how to make danger look like diplomacy. You're still unmarried, still alone, still ruling, and Europe is running out of ways to contain you. But how does a woman stay in power, alone, surrounded by enemies, in a world built for kings? What happens when your enemies don't just oppose you politically, but believe God wants you dead? And how long can a queen without an heir survive? You begin each day not with peace, but with calculation. By the 1570s, your face is everywhere. On coins, on wall tapestries, in painted allegories of wisdom and purity. But your crown weighs heavier with every passing year. You're no longer the young girl with clever eyes and sharp Latin. You are the Virgin Queen, the Protestant defender, the excommunicated heretic, and the most dangerous woman alive, because your enemies now believe that killing you isn't just political, it's spiritual. Plots form like rot beneath floorboards. The Ridolfi plot, the Throckmorton plot, the Babington plot. Catholic nobles, foreign agents, and even members of your own court conspire against you, and behind it all, a single name keeps rising like smoke in a locked chamber. Mary, Queen of Scots. She is everything you're not. Catholic, a mother, a widow, a queen by blood with a stronger claim, many believe, to England's throne than you. She's also impetuous, careless with her allies, and too romantic for her own good. So when she flees to your shores after losing her Scottish crown, you don't greet her with sympathy. You don't offer her a throne. You give her a room, a prison cell actually, one with fine drapes and guards at every door, and then you wait. For 19 years you hold her there, because if you execute her, you become a murderer of royalty, an act that could legitimize invasion. But if you let her go, she becomes a weapon sharpened by your enemies. So instead, you stall, you feed her, you monitor her letters, you move her from one house to another, tiring her, weakening her spirit. She writes poems, you send agents, she charms her guards, you arrest her correspondence, and then, finally, a mistake. In 1586, your spies intercept a letter where Mary approves a plan to assassinate you. It's not a theory, it's not hearsay, it's treason, written in her own hand. The Babington plot collapses in blood and arrests, and you finally sign her death warrant. It is the hardest decision of your reign. You delay the execution for weeks, perhaps hoping for a last-minute reprieve or divine intervention. None comes, and so, on February 8th, 1587, Mary Stuart is led to the block. She dies in red, like a martyr, her head removed in 3 strokes. Your enemies see it as a declaration of war, and they respond in kind. The Spanish Armada sets sail the following year, 130 ships sent by King Philip II of Spain to crush you, reclaim England for Catholicism, and avenge Mary's death. It is not a raid. It is an apocalypse in the making. You're 54 years old. You climb onto your horse and ride to Tilbury in full armour. You're not a warrior. You've never held a sword in combat, but your soldiers need more than orders. They need belief, and you give it to them. You speak, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." It is a line remembered for centuries, though at the time it is heard with wet boots, hungry bellies, and breath held against invasion. But the Armada never lands. Storms shred its ranks, English fire ships scatter their formation, the seas betray them. Your advisors call it a miracle, you call it providence. Europe sees it as a sign. You're not merely a queen, you're untouchable, but you know better. Victory brings no peace. The war with Spain continues for years. Ireland boils with rebellion. Parliament demands more funds, more taxes, more concessions. You walk a tightrope, never giving too much, never risking too little. The court dances go on, but the faces around you begin to age. You lose your closest friend and advisor, Robert Dudley. You lose your patience with suitors and sermons. You begin to speak more often in metaphors, the body politic, the marriage to your kingdom, the state as a tapestry you alone must keep from unravelling. You're no longer ruling as a woman among men. You have become something else, entirely. You are icon and enigma. You're sovereign and servant. You're the still point in a storm that never ends. Your ladies-in-waiting say you speak to mirrors as if they're listening. You sleep little. You dance less. You write speeches in the middle of the night, practicing every phrase until it can't be misunderstood or misused. But the question still remains. How long can you stay at the centre of a web that never stops spinning? Your counsel whispers about the future. You have no heir, no husband, no clear successor, and yet you refuse to name one. Perhaps out of pride, perhaps because deep down you know, the moment your successor is known, your usefulness wanes. You're now well into your 60s, a remarkable age for your time, You wear white lead makeup to conceal illness and age, even though it poisons the skin beneath. Your teeth rot, your hair thins, but your will never wavers, and still, no one dares to challenge you outright, because you remain the most dangerous woman in Europe, not because of violence or lineage or armies, but because you are the living proof that a woman can rule, survive, and outwit the world around her. But what happens to a queen when the world finally moves on? When the courtiers begin to murmur your name in the past tense, and when the mask of power starts to crack, what will they see underneath? The years press on, and the pageantry becomes heavier. You still attend court, still speak with measured grace, but the hours wear longer, the eyes around you grow younger, and you begin to feel like a statue in your own palace. You are Queen Elizabeth I, and yet something has changed. You've won your wars, you've outlived your enemies, and now only time itself dares to challenge you. The old names that once anchored your court are fading. Walsingham, your spy master, is dead. So is Leicester, your lifelong confidant and perhaps something more. Even your favoured successor, the Earl of Essex, betrays you with reckless ambition, launching a rebellion in 1601 against your rule. And you, now past 65, respond with the same cold precision you always have. You sign his execution order without ceremony, but it takes something from you. The court watches as you begin to withdraw. You lose your appetite, you stop sleeping. You spend hours standing still, refusing to lie down. You no longer tolerate mirrors in your chamber, and when one is accidentally left uncovered, you shatter it. The woman you see there is not the Virgin Queen. She's a tired monarch carrying the weight of decades, but the kingdom still stands, and you are still its crown. You wear elaborate wigs and paint your face with layers of white to maintain the image of ageless sovereignty. But it is not vanity. It is strategy. Because you know, as you always have, that perception is power. The moment your body is seen as frail, so too will be your reign. And so you keep the illusion intact. Every gesture, every word is rehearsed, you understand. The gravity of your image better than any king who came before. You are both monarch and myth now, and myths must never bleed. Still, the world beyond the palace is changing. England is no longer the fractured island you inherited. It is becoming a force. Theatres brim with words that echo your own image. Shakespeare crafts queens and storms and kingdoms undone by pride. Seafarers return from distant lands with stories of wealth and horror. The East India Company receives your blessing and begins reshaping global trade. You see the beginnings of empire, though you will not live to rule it. Your people now refer to your rule as a golden age. But golden ages are not lived. They are named after the fact, usually after the person who made them is dead, and you feel it. In March of 1603, the sickness finally takes you. You refuse to go to bed even as your limbs weaken. You sit on the cushions in your chamber, silent, staring at nothing for hours. Your ladies whisper that you're waiting, for what they do not know. You no longer speak, you no longer eat, and still you do not surrender. Eventually your council forces the issue. You're too weak to resist. They carry you to your bed, and there, surrounded by candlelight and shadows, you drift. You never officially name a successor, but your silence is interpreted as consent. James VI of Scotland will become James I of England, the first Stuart king. When you die on March 24th, 1603, after 45 years on the throne, the people do not cheer. They mourn. You were the only monarch many of them had ever known. A woman who turned survival into supremacy, who turned exile into empire, who ruled alone in a world that demanded marriage, motherhood and obedience, and gave them none of it. Your funeral is grand, sombre and public. You're buried in Westminster Abbey beside your half-sister Mary, the very queen who once imprisoned you. The inscription reads simply, "Partners both in throne and grave, here rest we two sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, in hope of the resurrection." But the truth is less poetic. You outlived her, outmaneuvered her, outshone her. Your reign is not remembered because you conquered new lands or fathered dynasties. It is remembered because you showed the world what a woman could do when given no path forward, and how dangerous she could become by forging one herself. You made yourself a symbol, not of softness, not of submission, but of calculated power, quiet endurance, and terrifying intelligence. For nearly half a century you kept the peace without giving up control. You danced between assassination attempts, religious wars, and foreign invasions, always with grace, never with surrender. And when the world asked who would rule England, you gave them an answer that made history pause. I will. Reflection. Elizabeth II's reign carved a path where none had been offered. She was not merely a queen who held on to power, she redefined it. By refusing marriage, cloaking herself, in image and surviving treachery on all sides, she became the living argument that sovereignty wasn't about strength or lineage alone. It was about endurance, cunning, and perception. In a Europe ruled by men, Elizabeth proved that a woman could be more feared than any king, not for her violence, but for her refusal to fall. But what might history have looked like if she had named an heir? If she had married? If she had simply played by the rules? And what does her reign say about the power of those who choose to lead? By not being led. You wake before dawn, not to the sound of a rooster, but the low clank of your own mail shirt as you dress in layers. You're not a soldier. Not exactly. You don't wield a sword in the king's name to fight enemies on the battlefield. You don't command an army or even ride at the head of a parade. Your role is quieter and far more dangerous. You're a tax collector in 13th century England. The title carries weight, but not the kind you'd hope. You're both feared and hated, respected only as far as your proximity to the crown. Your job is to go where the king himself cannot, to villages too small for royal notice and towns too clever to pay what they owe, and to take, not suggest, not negotiate, take. Today your route winds through a stretch of farmland in Norfolk. These aren't noble lands. They're owned by smallholders and serfs who owe levies to the local lord, who in turn owes levies to the crown. You serve the final link in that long, crushing chain. You have a scroll of names, a sealed order from the exchequer, and 2 armed men on horseback beside you, just in case. As the sun rises, the first village appears like a smear of smoke and thatch on the horizon. It is quiet. Too quiet. The people know you're coming. They always know. You ride slowly, letting the steel glint from your side catch the morning light. Visibility is important. Intimidation is part of your uniform. The first house is a small timber-framed structure, half collapsing, with a pig tied near the doorway. A man steps outside, eyes narrowed. He's a reeve, something like a peasant overseer. He doesn't bow, but he doesn't look you in the eyes either. He knows the routine. You announce the tax. Grain, wool, a portion of their pigs or chickens, or, if they have it, silver. He begins to argue. Everyone argues. The yield was poor this year. The mill was damaged in a storm. His cousin died and left 6 children. You nod. You write something on your scroll. But it changes nothing. Your presence is the king's demand given form. So you take what is owed. The grain is measured with iron scoops. You mark each barrel in chalk. Knowing most peasants water the contents to make it look fuller, you accept it anyway. It's your job to record it honestly, but not necessarily to care. You'll leave that to the local sheriff or the Crown's auditors months later. You're only the blade. They are the hand that swung it. As you move through the village, resistance grows more subtle. Children vanish. Livestock are hidden in barns. Old women spit near your feet. You're not surprised. In truth, you expect worse. Last winter, one of your fellow collectors was beaten with a rake and left in a ditch outside Lincoln. He died before his horse found its way home. That's why you wear mail now, because tax collecting in the Middle Ages isn't clerical work. It's a full-contact survival sport. By mid-morning, the barrels are full, the silver counted, and a piglet squealing inside a rope sling tied to your saddle. It's not elegant, it's not even efficient, but it works. The villagers grumble and glare, but none resist openly. Because everyone remembers what happened the last time someone tried. You ride toward the second village. This one is larger, home to a manor house and a small church. You'll need to stop at the rectory as well. Even the clergy must pay their share, though they often pretend otherwise. It's one of the quiet hypocrisies of the age. The church, with all its piety, is among the crown's largest debtors. The priest meets you with a forced smile. He offers bread. You refuse. You're not here to be bought, and accepting favours weakens your authority. Inside you find your real prize, a small chest of tithes. Technically it's meant for God. Practically it's yours to assess. You count the silver. Cross-check the scroll. Your companions watch the doors. You can feel the tension in the air, not just discomfort, but contempt. You are, in the eyes of this priest and his flock, a reminder that the king's mercy has limits. That prayer might save the soul, but it will not save the coin. You mount up again by early afternoon. Your scroll is heavier with notes, your saddlebag full with a patchwork of goods. You'll deliver them to the local sheriff's hall for record and redistribution, and from there they'll be passed upward toward the royal treasury. Some of it will be used to fund soldiers in Wales. Some of it will disappear into noble hands. Most will vanish into the bottomless throat of the king's household budget. You know this, but it is not your concern. Your concern is survival, and that's why, as you leave the village, you look back. Because even now, you know the people are watching, remembering, waiting. You know that at the next poor harvest, when desperation outweighs fear, they might not simply glare, they might throw stones, and if they do, your helmet won't stop all of them. But what happens when a tax collector faces a village that has nothing left to give? And what does loyalty mean when the king demands more than the land can offer? By late afternoon, you arrive at the edge of the third village, and the air here is wrong. The path narrows, the trees close in. There are no children playing in the road, no women hanging laundry, no dogs barking, only stillness. You slow your horse. The two men riding with you, hired guards from a nearby garrison, exchange a glance but say nothing. Like you, they've done this before. They know the signs. A quiet village isn't a peaceful village. It's a warning. You've been assigned to this region because the sheriff requested someone unshakable. You suspect that's code for someone who doesn't ask too many questions, or perhaps just someone expendable. The last collector in this region disappeared last winter after demanding double tithes from a manor that had lost half its cattle to disease. You were the replacement. The village looks no different than the others. Wattle and daub houses, smoke curling from chimneys, a lopsided well in the square, but the silence is thick. You dismount and walk slowly toward the central cottage. A woman watches you from a window. An old man sits on a stump carving something you can't quite make out. He doesn't stop when you approach. You knock on the door of the Reeves house. No answer. You knock again, louder this time. Finally a man opens the door. A Reeve, yes, but not the one listed on your tax register. He doesn't introduce himself, just looks past you at the guards. Then he says it. There's nothing left. You've heard the excuse before. You pull out your scroll. There were 4 ploughs here last year, 3 sheep per household, 12 barrels of ale recorded for trade. There should be something. The man shakes his head. 3 houses burned after the last frost. The mill collapsed. We haven't had salt in a month. You step aside and motion for your guards. The process is routine. Verify the storehouses, check the livestock, assess what can still be taken. But there's no grain in the bins, no pigs in the pen. Only 1 sickly goat and 2 thin hens. This isn't resistance, this is collapse. Still, the law is the law. The crown expects payment. If they can't offer silver or goods, they owe in kind. Labour, timber, woven cloth, anything. The Reeve doesn't argue. He doesn't shout or plead. He only nods. And that's when you feel it. The look behind his eyes. Not fear, not submission. Something else. Resignation. You order the villagers to bring whatever goods they can. Broken tools, dented pots, a cask of sour ale. It's not worth 1/3 of what they owe. But you record it anyway. You begin to write a note of warning beside their entry. A mark that says non-compliant without saying it aloud. That mark will follow them. It will trigger harsher visits, tighter scrutiny, possible seizure of land. You stop your pen. Because something in you, something very small and inconvenient, wonders, what if they truly have nothing? What if for once a village is telling the truth? You scan the faces of the children lined up at the well. Thin arms, bare feet. They don't beg or cry, they just look through you. You remember a conversation from months ago. A minor noble at court, drunk on imported wine, laughing about the peasant belly, as if hunger was part of the landscape, inevitable, unimportant, and yet here it is, in front of you. You lower your pen, you record partial payment. You do not mark them for punishment. Your guards raise eyebrows but say nothing. It is a risk, but not a rebellion. You leave the village with next to nothing, just a few items bundled in cloth, and a bitter wind that clings to your cloak. You tell yourself it's a one-time mercy. That leniency now prevents revolt later, but you know what the exchequer will think. You failed to collect. Still, you ride on. As evening falls, you reach a crossroad. 3 paths stretch before you. One leads to the sheriff's hall, where your reports will be examined and your loyalty assessed. One leads back to your home, a modest stone house near the abbey where your sister is a scribe. The third path leads to another village, one not yet visited this quarter. You hesitate. You were meant to visit 5 villages today. You've only reached 3. You're already behind quota, and failure in your role is not tolerated for long. The crown may need taxes, but it never runs short of replacements. You turn your horse toward the 4th village. Because rest is for merchants, and pity is for priests, and no one mourns a tax collector who stops doing his job. But what happens when the job you were given becomes the thing that breaks you? And how long can one man ride the line between service and cruelty before something inside begins to split? The last village on your list is smaller than you expected. You arrive just as the sun begins to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows that stretch like ropes across the road. You've been riding since dawn. The grain dust from earlier villages clings to your sleeves, your boots are stiff with mud, and your body aches from the slow, deliberate posture you're forced to maintain in the saddle. But you cannot afford to appear tired. Not here, not ever. Because once a tax collector appears vulnerable, he stops being the king's voice and becomes just another man with coin in his pouch. The village is little more than a cluster of cottages strung along a shallow river. You pass a few bent figures working with pitchforks, hauling sodden straw into bundles. They don't look up. You smell damp moss, wet wool, and faintly, smoke. That's when you see it. One of the cottages is burned. Not entirely, but enough that the roof is caved in. Charred rafters, blackened stone. It's recent. You dismount and approach the nearest woman, middle-aged, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes distant. You ask what happened. Her answer is simple: lightning. You doubt it. Lightning doesn't hit only one roof and leave the others untouched. But you don't push. You begin your circuit as always. This village is poorer than the others. The yields are meagre, the cloth coarse, no silver changes hands. The people offer saltfish, brittle bread, and a few bottles of cloudy ale. One house produces a sack of dried beans clearly stored for their own winter use. Still, they offer it. And so, in the ledger, you mark it all. The sun sets fully by the time you reach the final house, a squat building with moss-covered walls and a broken fence out front. You approach, knock once. No answer. You knock again. A child peeks from the side window, then vanishes. You wait. Eventually the door creaks open, and a man steps out, barefoot, shirt half-buttoned. He's not hostile, but he isn't respectful either. "You've had your share already," he says flatly. You look down at your scroll. This house isn't marked as paid. "The list says otherwise," you reply. He says nothing, just steps aside, invites you in without speaking. Your guards shift behind you. One places a hand on the hilt of his sword, but you shake your head and step inside alone. The cottage is dark. A single candle flickers. You notice there's no food laid out, no bundles ready for assessment, only a small pot on the fire and a few pewter cups. You take in the room quietly. "There's nothing left," the man says again. But it's not a plea, it's a challenge. You study his face. He's tired, but not defeated. Something about him stands too straight, too calm, as if he's waiting for something. Then you notice it, the scar on his arm. Old, but deep. A soldier once. Likely fought in one of the king's early Welsh campaigns. Probably saw what happened to men who refused orders, but also perhaps saw what happened to those who gave them. You step back, slowly. "I'll mark it partial," you say. You don't wait for a response. You leave the cottage, remount your horse, and nod to the guards. One looks confused but follows. You ride out under the stars. By the time you reach the sheriff's hall, it is past midnight. A clerk greets you with dry ink-stained fingers, asking for scrolls and receipts. You hand them over. You keep your expression blank. You've learned not to explain your decisions unless asked. Still, you notice something strange. The sheriff isn't there, nor are most of the other collectors, just the clerk, alone. You ask about the others. He tells you 3 haven't returned. He says it without emotion, just a fact. They might have been delayed, or worse. Then he adds something. "The sheriff will want to speak to you about your entries, especially the ones marked partial." You nod once, pretend it doesn't bother you, but it does, because you know how thin the line is between trusted servant and scapegoat. If too many villages under your watch go unpaid, they'll say you've grown soft, or worse, corrupt. If someone needs to be punished to reassert control, they will choose the one who looks the most understanding. You. You ride home in silence, your guards dismissed at the gate. You live alone, in a modest cottage near the edge of town. No servants, no family, just a locked chest for the king's coin, and a ledger too valuable to burn. You light a single candle and begin to copy your notes into the royal book, line by line. You do not embellish, you do not falsify, but you hesitate. And in that pause you wonder, how many more years can you do this? How long can one man wear the weight of obedience without becoming hollow? You remember the faces of the villagers, the gaunt children, the old woman kneeling by the well, the man with the soldier's scar, the reeve who knew your name before you spoke it. You're not their enemy, but you're not their friend. You are the reminder that even in a forgotten village no one bothers to name, the king still reaches. And when the king reaches, someone must bleed. Reflection. The life of a medieval tax collector was rarely noble and never safe. They operated in the gaps between power and poverty, navigating a world where duty to the crown often meant betrayal of their conscience. They were the middlemen of monarchy, tools used to turn hardship into revenue and loyalty into silence. Most are forgotten, but their work built the roads, paid the soldiers, and funded the wars that shaped kingdoms. And in their quiet, often thankless role, they held a truth that few dared say aloud. There is no such thing as power without consequence. You wake inside a world hidden from the eyes of men outside, walls thick with secrets, corridors lined with silk, and whispers that never quite reach the palace gates. You're not a soldier, a noble, or even a member of the royal family. You're a eunuch in the Ottoman Empire, tasked with guarding one of the most mysterious and closely guarded institutions of the age, the Sultan's harem. This is not a place of frivolous luxury as many imagine. It is a carefully governed society, a centre of political intrigue, family alliances, and silent power. Your body has been altered, your manhood removed, to ensure you can be trusted in the company of the Sultan's women. But your influence extends far beyond mere guard duty. You serve as gatekeeper, messenger, advisor, and sometimes as kingmaker. Today, your day begins before dawn. You wash carefully, don your robes embroidered with the crescent and star, and make your way through the labyrinthine palace. Your first task is simple but vital. Ensure no unauthorized person crosses the threshold into the harem. Inside, the women move like shadows, wives, concubines, servants, and attendants. Some hold titles, some hold secrets. Many dream of power, a few grasp it. Your role is to watch, to listen, and sometimes to decide which whispers become news, and which are silence forever. The Sultan's favour is a treasure beyond price, but also a dangerous game. You observe the subtle shifts in alliance between women jockeying for position. The mother of the Sultan's heir, the Queen Mother, holds extraordinary sway. Her eunuch confidants become her voice in the palace politics that shape the empire. You deliver messages sealed with the Sultan's ring. You carry secrets that could topple viziers or elevate servants. You live in a strange limbo, inside and outside, trusted yet untrusted, powerful yet powerless. The palace walls are your prison and your kingdom. You spend hours in council chambers, watching ministers bicker over tax revenues, military campaigns and court appointments, all while knowing the true power often flows through the corridors you patrol. You are privy to intrigues no ambassador or general could dream of. But your body marks you as less than a man in the eyes of many. You endure whispers, jokes and threats. You bear your wounds quietly, because in your silence you command more than swords or titles. You are a shadow in the Empire's brightest light. You have survived countless reigns, and you will survive more. But how long can such power remain invisible? And what happens when the silence breaks? The sun rises high over Topkapi Palace, but the real power moves quietly in its shadowed halls. You, a chief eunuch, have risen from the ranks, not through birthright or wealth, but through loyalty, cunning, and ruthless patience. Your body tells only half the story. The absence of manhood, once a symbol of servitude, now a tool of influence. It grants you access few men could ever claim. You alone can enter the private chambers of the Sultan's women, the secluded heart of the empire. Your day begins in the privy chamber, where the Sultan's mother awaits your counsel. She is older now, her face marked with the lines of decades spent weaving the fate of dynasties. You listen as she speaks softly of court intrigues and alliances, knowing your advice carries the weight of the empire. Outside, the harem is not just a residence but a crucible of politics. The favourite concubines compete for the sultan's attention, knowing a child could secure their family's future, or doom it. You monitor their rivalries, delivering messages that shift loyalties like pieces on a chessboard. You oversee the flow of information between the palace and the outside world, acting as intermediary between the sultan and his ministers. The Grand Vizier, powerful as he is, depends on your subtle intelligence. Your ears catch rumours that ministers might miss. Your voice can sway decisions behind closed doors. This power is both intoxicating and dangerous, because your position depends on trust, and trust is fragile. You remember the fate of a previous chief eunuch who overstepped, who dared to challenge a vizier's authority. He was imprisoned, then poisoned quietly in the dead of night. You have learned to navigate this perilous tightrope. Your influence extends even beyond the palace. When foreign envoys arrive, you arrange meetings, guide conversations, and sometimes deliver veiled threats. You are a living message of the Sultan's reach. Yet for all your power, you live with constant reminders of your liminal state. No matter how many favours you win, no matter how much wealth you accumulate, you remain a eunuch, neither fully man nor fully accepted by the court's male elite. Your presence in the harem is a paradox, protector and prisoner, sovereign and servant. Your authority is immense but must always be exercised in shadows. You learn secrets others would kill for. You broker peace between factions. You punish dissent before it can bloom. But you also carry the weight of silence, because any misstep could mean exile, disgrace, or death. You wonder, how long can a power so dependent on secrecy survive in a world ever more hungry for openness? And when the empire changes, what place will be left for those who rule from the shadows? The twilight of your life arrives quietly, like a whisper in the marble halls. You have served sultans, viziers, and queens for decades, your name never recorded in history books, your face unknown beyond palace walls. Yet your influence shaped decisions that sent armies to war, signed treaties that redrew maps, and determined which courtiers would rise or fall. You watch the empire transform around you. The world beyond Istanbul stirs with change. European powers grow bolder. New weapons, new ideas challenge old orders. The Sultan's grip tightens, but cracks appear. Your role becomes more precarious. You find yourself mediating not just palace intrigues, but conflicts between factions within the empire itself, janissaries, ulama, and provincial governors. The eunuchs are no longer just guardians. They are power brokers, wielding their influence with both subtlety and ruthlessness. Yet, for all this, you are still a eunuch, a man without a manhood, held at a distance by many, trusted by some. You know that your kind's power is a delicate balance. Too much ambition, and you risk the wrath of the Sultan or his advisors. Too little, and you fade into obscurity. But your greatest power lies in invisibility. No one suspects the eunuch who smiles politely at court is the same man whose whispered words have toppled ministers or saved dynasties. You have lived in shadows, but your touch has shaped the empire's brightest light. As your final days approach, you consider your legacy. Not monuments or titles, those are for kings and generals. Yours is a legacy written in silence, in the unrecorded moments when a word, a glance, or a withheld secret changed the course of history. You wonder, will the empire remember you? Will history recognize the invisible hand that held its fate? Or will you remain a ghost behind palace walls, forever unseen but never forgotten by those who truly understand power? Reflection. The Ottoman eunuchs were paradoxes, both marginalized and essential, voiceless yet influential. Their unique position allowed them to wield power in a society that otherwise excluded them from the traditional hierarchies. They remind us that power is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it is the quiet guardians of secrets, the unseen intermediaries, who shape history's course, and sometimes the most dangerous people are those who no one expects to be dangerous at all. You wake before the first light of dawn, stirred not by the call of birds but by the low tolling of the monastery bell. It is 3:30 a.m., and the day ahead promises hours of routine, repetition, and ritual. You are a monk in a medieval monastery. part of a vast network of religious communities scattered across Europe. Your world is a walled enclosure of stone and wood, where silence is a law as strict as any royal decree. Outside these walls, kingdoms rise and fall, but here time seems to stand still. Your day begins with matins, a service of prayers and psalms sung in Latin. You stand shoulder to shoulder with brothers cloaked in coarse wool, voices rising in austere harmony. It is a moment of unity, yet also of personal discipline. Every word, every breath must be exact. There is no room for error. After prayers, you proceed to the scriptorium. Here your fingers grasp a quill, and your eyes strain under the flickering candlelight as you copy ancient manuscripts. Each letter must be perfect, each margin respected. Mistakes are erased carefully with pumice. This labour is tedious, yet vital. The words you preserve might be centuries old, containing the knowledge of philosophers, scientists, and theologians. Through your work, the wisdom of antiquity survives plague, war, and time itself. But the scriptorium is not your only task. The Opus Dei, or work of God, includes not only prayer but also physical labour. You may tend the gardens, planting herbs and vegetables that will sustain your community, or you may repair the roof, haul water, or cook the simple meals that nourish your brothers. All work is prayer, and all prayer is work. At midday you break for the sex service, another brief prayer, then eat in silence, listening only to the reading of Scripture. The food is plain, bread, cheese, and perhaps some broth. You chew slowly, aware that excess is a sin, and appetite a temptation to be tamed. After the meal, you return to your duties. The afternoon might find you teaching novices, tending the sick in the infirmary, or recording the monastery's accounts. By late afternoon, the Vespers service calls you back to the chapel. The fading light casts long shadows as you sing again, the sound carrying through stone arches and wooden beams. Finally, at sunset, the day ends with Compline, the last prayers before silence and sleep. As you crawl into your narrow bed, the rhythm of your day repeats in your mind. It is monotonous. It is predictable. It is far from the grand battles and courts that fill history books. And yet, without this grinding routine, without the patience and perseverance of monks like you, much of Europe's knowledge and culture would have vanished into darkness. Your hands, tired but steady, have copied texts that will one day inspire the Renaissance. Your prayers, whispered in the quiet, have formed the backbone of medieval spirituality. But beneath, the peace, you wonder. What happens to a life lived almost entirely in routine? Can meaning be found in endless repetition? And how does the world outside the monastery walls survive without knowing your name? It is winter now. Snow rests gently along the monastery's eaves, and the cold seeps into the stones. But inside, your routine never changes. Prayers, meals, labour, study. Again and again. You've memorised the sound of the bell before it rings. You no longer flinch when the cold ink touches your fingers in the scriptorium. You know, precisely, how many breaths it takes to walk from the garden to the refectory. Life here is so repetitive it becomes timeless, an eternal loop of submission, silence, and study. But this monotony is not empty. It's the framework of civilization. While kings fight battles for fleeting glory, you and your brothers are quietly preserving something far more permanent: knowledge. In the scriptorium, you don't just copy scripture. You transcribe ancient Roman legal codes. You ink diagrams of astronomical models. You replicate medicinal recipes from forgotten physicians. You are a monk, yes, but you are also a librarian, a teacher, a translator, and a historian. Even your monotony has a purpose. Every year new novices arrive, illiterate, uncertain, sometimes barely more than boys. You teach them, Latin first, then Greek, then the long, slow discipline of the quill. They cry in silence, many of them, overwhelmed by the weight of the rules, the quiet, the sameness. But eventually they learn, just as you did. You watch them grow. One day they too will copy books. They will preserve texts from decay, replicate maps that would otherwise crumble, and maintain the fragile continuity of European thought. And still, outside the monastery, the world burns. It always does. Peasants riot in the nearby village. A new plague has arrived from the east. A local baron demands tithes the monks cannot pay. Sometimes soldiers march near the gates, though they rarely enter. The abbey is a sacred space, yes, but also a target. You remember the first time a tax collector came and threatened to seize part of the grain stores. You stood silently as the abbot negotiated. It was tense, but bloodless. You returned to copying the letters of Cicero that night, unchanged. But that grain had been meant for the poor, because while many monasteries are isolated, you're not just a recluse, you are a neighbour. The community brings its sick, its hungry, its dying to your gates. You give them bread, basic medicine, a place to rest. You grow herbs for poultices. You keep records of births and deaths for nearby villages. You even serve as unofficial scribes when local peasants need to draft contracts or wills. The church may seem distant and lofty, but to these people you are the church. And so your role deepens, not just as a spiritual guide, but as a quiet steward of order in a world that feels ever on the brink of chaos. You wonder how many monks have done this work before you. Hundreds, thousands. Your name will likely never be remembered. There will be no statue, no history book recounting your life. And yet, because you preserved a scroll, taught a novice, tended a dying farmer, something of you will live on. Still, the routine weighs on you. You begin to ask, is this life of quiet discipline and quiet anonymity truly living? Or is it a sacrifice of self for the sake of something greater? Something you will never see, but others will one day rely on. The bells ring again. Evening has come. You put down your pen, close the thick vellum page, and bow your head in prayer. Another day fades into the stone, another small, quiet offering to history. The years pass in silence. You do not mark them with birthdays or celebrations, only feast days, fasts, and funerals. Your beard has greyed. Your hands, once smooth, now tremble faintly when you write. You move slower through the cloister, and your vision blurs when the candle burns too low. But you are still here, and that is no small thing, because survival is the work, not just your own, but the survival of memory, method, and meaning. The monastery endures, not because it resists the world, but because it absorbs it, documents it, shapes it from within. A strange letter arrived last week, from another abbey across the river. Their scriptorium caught fire in a lightning storm. Dozens of manuscripts were lost, some copies of texts your own monastery had once sent to them. Now they ask, could you send replacements? You remember when you helped copy those texts. They were dull, legal decrees from Charlemagne's time, agricultural notes, sermons in fractured Latin. And yet, without your pages, those words would now be gone. In that moment, something becomes clearer. These records, so tedious to produce, are the threads stitching Europe's future together. Every law copied, every land deed preserved, every herbal cure inked into parchment. It's all part of a great, slow system, a system of memory. In the centuries to come, kings will claim glory for building nations. But you, quiet, unnoticed, unarmed, you are building the continuity of those nations. You are the library through which civilization survives its own self-inflicted amnesia. And that library lives in flesh, not just stone. In the minds of the novices who arrive each year, in the practices you've passed on, how to boil ink from oak galls, how to bind a codex so it lasts, how to translate Greek into something a German bishop might understand. These are not glorious tasks. They are invisible legacies. You've also written your fair share of chronicles, local histories of famine, of minor conflicts, of miraculous births and mysterious deaths. No one outside your region will ever read them, but someday, centuries later, a scholar will dust off that codex in a forgotten library and find your script, and they will know what life felt like here, long after you are gone. It occurs to you that maybe, just maybe, you're not nameless after all. You are etched in ink. This week the garden has sprouted early. You remember when you planted the first rows of medicinal herbs 20 winters ago. The apothecary now uses your diagrams, your labels, your instructions. A younger monk, whose name you sometimes forget, consults your notes daily. It is not pride you feel. It's something quieter. A kind of still satisfaction that you will never speak aloud. The monks joke less now. Many of your old companions have died. Cholera, infection, or simple age. You buried them behind the orchard, under stone markers carved only with a cross. No names. That is the rule. And yet you remember every one of them. You carry them in your rituals, in your schedule, in your silence, in the habits you still uphold not out of fear, but love. For them, for the rhythm of this strange, stubborn life. One day soon, you'll be buried too. No epitaph, no legacy in the worldly sense. But the book you just finished copying will outlive you. The garden you designed will feed someone you will never meet. The scrolls you saved from the rainstorm 2 decades ago, yes, they'll be studied by someone who does not know your name but owes their understanding to your hands. And maybe that's enough. Maybe history isn't moved by heroes and wars alone. Maybe it's also written by those who quietly preserve it, one sleepy, silent, ink-stained day at a time. And as you bow for evening prayer, hands aching, voice dry, candlelight dancing across the walls, you find yourself wondering, how many others, like you, built the future so slowly no one noticed? And how many more are doing it right now? The morning begins the way many have in Tudor England. Overcast skies, heavy with the smell of coal fires, and the quiet rustle of servants moving through ancient halls. But this morning is different, because you are no longer just Elizabeth. You are now Queen Elizabeth I of England, and no one expected you to make it this far. You were never supposed to inherit the crown. You were the second daughter of a disgraced mother, Anne Boleyn, the queen who lost her head. Your childhood was defined by instability. One day, you were a princess. The next, you were declared illegitimate. Your father, Henry VIII, cycled through wives like war horses. Your half-brother Edward ruled briefly. Your half-sister Mary ruled fiercely. And now, after a tangled web of executions, betrayals, and religious upheaval, you sit on the throne. But you're not safe. You are young. You're unmarried. And to many, especially the crowned heads of Europe, you are a problem that must be solved. To Spain, you are a Protestant heretic, an upstart child on a fragile throne. To France, you are an opportunity for marriage, diplomacy, or destruction, whichever is most convenient. To your own nobles, you are an untested ruler with too much power and too few allies. But the truth is, you know all this. You've been watching from the margins for years. As a girl, you learned quickly that power was dangerous, but so was being powerless. You studied Latin while other girls learned embroidery. You mastered statecraft under the watchful eyes of men who hoped you would make a mistake. You walked through corridors lined with spies, surviving plots that should have ended your life before it even began. And now, you have something that makes you more dangerous than anyone expected. You have learned how to endure. It starts with your court. You craft it carefully, slowly, methodically. You bring in advisors who will challenge you, but never outshine you. William Cecil becomes your right hand, your compass, in a sea of treachery. Francis Walsingham becomes your eyes in the dark, building a spy network so vast it reaches from London to Rome. These are not war generals or sword-swinging heroes. These are bureaucrats, scribes, intelligence men. Because your war will not be fought on battlefields, not yet. It will be fought in letters, in marriages you do not make, in laws you do not pass, in the careful way you walk between Protestant and Catholic factions, never pleasing either, but never alienating both. Your court is a web, and you are its patient spider. When foreign ambassadors enter your presence, they find a woman who smiles softly, who speaks fluently, who quotes Greek philosophers, and gives away nothing. Even your appearance is political. You dress not as a woman, but as a symbol. Your hairline is plucked high, your gowns are stitched with pearls and embroidered with suns and phoenixes. You become an image, not a person. You tell them you are married to England. You tell them your body belongs to the crown. And in doing so, you deny Europe its most powerful weapon against you, marriage, because every king wants to tame a queen, and you have just made yourself untouchable, but danger still circles. Mary, Queen of Scots, your cousin, your rival, your Catholic mirror, waits in the wings, claiming your crown is stolen. Papal envoys whisper that you're illegitimate, that your mother was no true queen, that your rule is heresy made flesh. And even in England your nobles conspire. So you strike back, not with swords, but with words. You have pamphlets printed, arguments distributed, declarations proclaimed. You use Protestant sermons to reinforce loyalty, turning the pulpit into a throne. You commission portraits that radiate divinity, control your image so tightly that even your aging face becomes mythic. You never marry, not because you cannot, but but because remaining single keeps the balance of power firmly in your hands. But your most dangerous move is the one that seems the most passive. You wait, you watch, you endure. Because in a Europe built on marriage alliances, military campaigns, and religious declarations, you change the rules. You show that survival is more potent than domination, that appearing fragile can be more crouching in the trench. Sometimes, while shells fall in the distance, it sticks in your teeth, it sticks in your memory. Some men can't stomach it after the war. Some never touch beef again. Food on the Western Front isn't about hunger so much as endurance. You're not starving, not exactly, but you're never full. The army feeds you just enough to function, but never enough to forget the war. Even the act of eating becomes a grim ritual, more necessity than comfort. And the food isn't fresh. Most rations arrive at the front weeks after being packed. By then, the biscuits are staler, the beef is more gelatinous, and anything green has long since turned to mush or disappeared. There's bread occasionally. Dark, heavy loaves called trench bread, or grey bread, made from a combination of rye, flour, sawdust, and crushed peas. When it rains, and it always rains, the bread moulds in a day. You eat it anyway. Scrape off the top if you're feeling cautious. Swallow it whole if you're not. There's jam sometimes, plum or apple. Thick, sugary sludge packed into tins. A miracle if you get one. A spoonful on a biscuit almost reminds you of the home. Almost. The ration lists on paper look generous. 1 pound of meat, 1/3 pound of bacon, 1/2 pound of bread or biscuit, 4 ounces of jam, 2 ounces of tea, 1 ounce of cheese, salt, sugar and rum in moderation. But this is theory. What you actually receive depends on supply lines, weather and chance. Sometimes you get dried peas instead of meat. Sometimes the meat is horse. Sometimes it's maconochi, a British stew of vegetables and mystery meat boiled in tins. Soldiers learn to dread it. Cold, it's nearly inedible. Hot, it's only slightly better. One soldier wrote home, "I'd rather eat my boots." Some did. And then there's the tea. Tea is the glue that holds your sanity together. It arrives in loose leaves or pre-filled bags, and you brew it in old mess tins, blackened from the fire. A hot cup of tea is salvation in the trenches. It washes down the bully beef. It warms your frozen hands. It gives you something to hold, something to smell, something to think about other than death. The army issues 2 ounces per day, but soldiers stretch it. Reboil the leaves, share with mates, hide a stash for nights when fear won't let you sleep. Sometimes you add a spoonful of sugar. If it's your birthday, maybe 2. Sugar becomes a currency. You don't eat alone. Everything you eat among other men. Some are silent, some joke too loudly, some shovel food into their mouths like they're afraid someone will take it away. Others pick at it, nibble like mice, as if eating slowly might make the moment last longer. And then there are the rats. The rats eat well. They crawl through the trenches at night, fat, bold and unafraid. They chew through your assassination, and you have her tried, and you have her executed. Not because you want to, but because you have to. Because her mere existence undermines your right to rule, and because all of Europe is watching. They had hoped you'd be sentimental. You show them you are not, and in doing so, you become terrifying. Because you have revealed the quiet truth about power. It is not earned by cruelty or lineage or even strength. It is earned by outlasting everyone else. You are not dramatic, you're not impulsive, you're not even particularly affectionate, but you are constant, and that is what makes you dangerous. Other monarchs rise and fall with their passions. Philip of Spain throws his empire into ruin chasing you. The French court burns itself to ash deciding how to manipulate you. Your own nobles find their plots turn in on themselves, like clockwork traps they've set too tightly. And you wait. You answer slowly. You delay. You consider. You hold the crown not by force but by absence. Every action you do not take becomes a statement. Every marriage you do not make is a weapon. Every heir you do not name drives your court into a panic and keeps everyone aligned under your single silent authority. Because without you, there is chaos, and you know it. Still, there is a cost to ruling like this. You are alone. You cannot trust the people closest to you. Your favourite Robert Dudley you keep at arm's length. He is a reminder of what could have been. A husband, perhaps. A consort. a mistake. Instead, he becomes another tool, a possible match dangled in front of France or Spain whenever the situation requires it. You have friends, but no equals. You have suitors, but no partners. You have allies, but no confidants. Even your body betrays you. You fall ill. Your hair thins. Your teeth blacken. But your image remains intact. You wear the white paint. You draw the sharp brows. You encase yourself in symbols, pearls for chastity, suns for authority, the phoenix for rebirth. You are not a woman anymore. You are a myth. You are not ruling England. You are England. And that perhaps is the most dangerous thing of all. Because what happens when the myth outlives the person? What happens when the woman beneath the crown begins to crack? You stare into the mirror each night, watching your image slowly harden into something unrecognisable. You sleep rarely. You trust no one. You know every ambassador by name, every treacherous cousin by history. You know that any misstep, any crack in the wall, might undo everything you've built. But you have one more war to fight, one more empire to face, and it's coming fast, across the sea. Still, for now, you turn back toward the window of your chamber, looking out over a nation that both fears and adores you. They still chant your name, they still obey your silence, but how long can silence hold back the thunder of the war? You hear it in the wind first. The rumours come like tremors underfoot. There are sails gathering in Spain, supplies moving through Lisbon, shipwrights working by torchlight, gold from the New World funneled into cannon and pitch, and priests whispering prayers for your death. It is no longer a whisper, it is a plan. The year is 1588. Philip of Spain has finally decided to break the silence, and the monster he's built is unlike anything Europe has seen. A floating fortress, they say. 130 ships, 20,000 men. It will sail through the English Channel, unite with the Duke of Parma in the Spanish Netherlands, and strike straight at your heart. You're not surprised. He married your sister, Mary Tudor. He expected England to remain Catholic, but then you rose, Protestant, unwed, unforgiving. You executed Mary, Queen of Scots, his Catholic ally. You allowed English pirates like Drake and Hawkins to raid his treasure fleets. You were the thorn he never removed, so now he comes to remove you. You do not flinch. Instead, you go to Tilbury. There is no need. You could stay behind palace gates, but you understand symbols. You are one. So you ride out in armour, not full plate, but enough to glitter in the sun. Your gown flows beneath it. You carry a sword, and when you speak, your voice carries over the soldiers, over the tents and pikes and mud. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too. The men erupt. They shout your name. You've given them more than a monarch. You've given them a reason. What you don't tell them is how fragile the defence really is. England's navy is smaller. Its ships are faster but fewer. The army is scattered. The coast is exposed. And if Philip lands, if his soldiers disembark and join with the Catholic sympathisers within your borders, then you're finished. But you do not blink. You let the silence fill the fear. And then something strange happens. Spain fails. They arrive, yes. They sail into the channel. But your ships, smaller and more manoeuvrable, harass them like hornets. The wind shifts. The tide is wrong. Communications between the Armada and Parma collapse. And when the Spanish anchor off Calais, your navy sends fireships, burning vessels packed with pitch and powder, straight into their midst. Panic spreads. Anchors are cut. Formations break. And the wind, the same wind Philip trusted to carry him to England, turns on him. A storm scatters his fleet northward, around Scotland, into the jaws of Irish reefs. Only half his ships return to Spain. The Armada is defeated, not by sheer power, but by resilience, by silence, by delay, by a queen who knew that time and patience and symbolism could do what swords could not. You do not gloat. You issue a prayer of thanksgiving. You strike a medal. God blew and they were scattered. You allow the celebrations, but not excess. You know the war isn't over. Spain will try again. Plots will continue. Your enemies will. Simply learn to be quieter. But now you're no longer merely feared. You're respected. Even loved. It is a strange thing, love. Something you have always wielded at a distance. You never married. You never named a successor. And yet, you ruled longer than most men dared dream. You took a broken, bankrupt kingdom and turned it into the beginnings of an empire. But now, you feel it shifting. Your friends are dead. Your spy master, Walsingham, gone. Your favourite, Robert Dudley, gone. The next generation of politicians whisper about succession. They eye your ageing form. They wait. You, the most dangerous woman in Europe, have become what you always feared. Replaceable. You see it in their faces. James of Scotland waits quietly. You've kept him dangling for years, never confirming his status as heir. Now, you think perhaps, you should. But your body no longer listens to your mind. You grow ill. You can no longer stand easily. You spend hours motionless, lost in memory, surrounded by attendants who say nothing. And when death comes, it comes as quietly as you lived. You slip into the dark on March 24th, 1603. There is no great declaration, no dying speech, just silence. And yet, England changes forever. You leave behind a kingdom no longer fractured, no longer trembling under foreign threats, but growing, unified, ambitious. The stage is set for Shakespeare, for naval conquests, for colonies abroad, for a new England. An England that doesn't merely survive, but dominates. It's a strange legacy. Because you were never a conqueror. You were never a warrior. You were not beautiful, not beloved by any single man, not even expected to rule. But you did. And you did it longer, smarter, and more ruthlessly than any of them. You turned your greatest weakness, your womanhood, into armour. You used marriage proposals as political tools. You let others speak while you waited, and in doing so you outmaneuvered kings, outlasted empires, and reshaped a continent. They called you the Virgin Queen. But what they should have called you was inevitable. You did not need sons to secure your dynasty. You were the dynasty. And even now, long after the crown passed from your cold fingers to another line, your ghost lingers, in strategy, in silence, in the stubborn will of a kingdom that learned its steel from a woman who never once picked up a sword. It begins quietly, always quietly, a soft rot, a strange dampness in the fields, in the air, in the soil. You kneel to dig up the potatoes and they crumble in your hand, soft, blackened, wet. One here, another there, then dozens, then hundreds, then entire fields of nothing but sludge. It is 1845, and you're a tenant farmer in Western Ireland. You don't own the land you till. It belongs to an English landlord, absentee almost always. You pay rent not in coins, but in crops and labour. The rest of your food, your only food, is the potato. You eat it boiled, mashed, fried in lard when there's any. Left morning, noon and night for months. It is how your children live, how your grandparents lived, and now it is dying. You don't understand why, neither do your neighbours, but the air has changed. The rains fall longer, the mornings arrive later, and when the blight creeps in, it is like watching the bones of your world dissolve. Phytophthora infestans, it will one day be called, a fungal-like organism that thrives in damp conditions, spreads invisibly through spores, and destroys a potato crop in days. But you don't know its name, you only know the ruin it brings. You pray, you wait, and then you starve. Ireland is not empty of food. That is the paradox. Ships still leave Dublin and Cork and Limerick loaded with grain, meat, butter, even potatoes. But those belong to the landlords, exported to Britain, sold for profit. Your tenancy agreement does not include mercy. The Irish Parliament was dissolved decades earlier. Ireland is now under direct rule from Westminster, and in London the problem is seen not as famine, but as failure. A failure of effort, a failure of character. The Irish, they say, are lazy, prone to overpopulation, dependent on one crop, unwilling to modernise. The famine, in this view, is not a tragedy but a correction, a chance to make the Irish self-reliant. So relief is minimal. Food aid is limited, rationed, conditional. If you want soup, you must give up your religion. If you want work, you must labour on roads that go nowhere. If you want land, you must leave your home forever. And if you cannot do those things, you die. By 1846 the blight returns, the weather worsens, the seed potatoes fail, the thatched roofs collapse under mildew and mould, typhus spreads, dysentery spreads, fever spreads, the clergy bury entire villages, and still the landlords collect their rent, often with the help of British soldiers. If you cannot pay, you are evicted. You watch your cottage torn down, your animals seized, your fields burned to prevent squatters. And that's when the rumours start. Across the ocean, they say, there is food, there is land. America becomes more than a dream. It becomes your escape plan. But the price of passage is high. It takes all your savings and often more. Families split apart. One child sent ahead. A widow barters her last pig. A village pools its coins to send one man with the hope he can send money back. And the ship? It is never what you expected. It waits in the harbour like a rotting whale. Too many passengers, too little food. A hull dark and damp, no ventilation. Rats in the straw. Buckets for toilets. You squeeze into a corner between two strangers, clutching your bag of bread and dried fish, and try not to cry, because once the anchor lifts, there is no going back. They call them coffin ships for a reason. Mortality rates are staggering. Sometimes 1 in 5 die in transit, sometimes more. Cholera sweeps through the deck like the deck. Wildfire. Children cough blood. Mothers weep silently over bundled shapes that stop breathing halfway across the Atlantic. There are no doctors. There are no funerals. Bodies are weighted with stones and tipped into the sea. You wonder if you'll see land again. You wonder if this was all a mistake. But then one morning the air changes. There's a cry from the top deck. You push through the crowd, and there, on the horizon, is a coastline like a smear of green on the edge of the sky. America. But this is not where your story ends. The coffin ship may have carried you to safety, but it also carried something else. A hunger. Not just for food, but for place, for meaning, for identity. You will land, yes, but you will not be welcomed. The Irish are seen as dirty, foreign, Catholic. They're crowded into slums in Boston and New York. They are blamed for disease, for crime, for taking jobs. You read signs that say, "No Irish need apply." You hear insults in a language you barely speak, and yet, you stay, you survive, you build. The Irish immigrants become the foundation of something new. Labourers on the railroads, servants in grand houses, cops in New York, politicians in Boston. Slowly, the names of your dead are replaced by streets, churches, neighbourhoods. But the cost never leaves you. You remember the coffin ship. You remember the rot. You remember how close it came to all of it ending. Not with a bang, but with a damp potato and a quiet hunger that nobody seemed to notice. You wonder, did the world even care? And if it didn't then, does it now? You're standing on the pier in New York Harbour. The salty air doesn't smell like salvation. It smells like horse dung, grease, and the sharp bite of coal smoke from a dozen iron ships grinding in and out of the port. Your legs are still weak from the voyage. Your clothes hang loose from the weight you lost crossing. There is no one to meet you, no one to tell you what to do next. You are here now, but no one is glad. Castle Garden is the first place they take you, an immigrant depot, where inspectors prod you for illness, where officials jot down names they cannot pronounce. O'Halloran becomes Holland, McGabbon becomes Smith. You don't argue, you're just grateful to be off the ship, but you're not free yet. You have no money, no job, no English. So you follow others like you, fellow survivors of the coffin ship, into the sprawling neighbourhoods of the 5 Points in Manhattan or South Boston, or the squalid alleys of Philadelphia. These are not places of opportunity. These are places of smoke-choked cellars and wooden shacks piled 5 families deep. A single privy for a whole block. Breadlines where people trade their shoes for flour. Your new neighbours are not always kind. To the Americans, you're a threat. In the 1840s and 50s, America is panicking about change. Cities are growing faster than they can be managed. Jobs are scarce. Disease is spreading. And here you are, waves of desperate Catholic immigrants flooding into Protestant cities. Politicians seize the opportunity. The Know-Nothing Party forms, vowing to protect America from the foreign scourge. They rail against the Irish as drunkards, criminals, breeders, loyal not to the Republic, but to the Pope in Rome. You read it in the newspapers. You hear it shouted in the streets. You see it painted on tavern doors. No Irish need apply. And still, you must survive. So you take the jobs no one else will. You dig canals with a pickaxe and a spoon. You pave roads with your bare hands. You clean out horse stalls in the freezing dark. The women work as laundresses or domestic servants. Bridget's scrubbing aristocratic chamber pots for pennies. The boys shine shoes. The girls marry young or vanish into the factories. You don't complain. There's no one to complain to. But something begins to shift. You're not alone. By the 1860s, the Irish are no longer a trickle. They are a tide. In cities like Boston, New York and Chicago, entire neighbourhoods turn Irish. Churches open with Gaelic sermons. Catholic schools begin to rival public ones. Saloon halls become political headquarters. And most important of all, your children are being born here, not as immigrants, but as citizens. Your name may be mangled, your accent mocked, but your children will vote, and they'll remember how their parents crossed an ocean with nothing but hunger in their stomachs and a dream they weren't sure would survive, and some will fight. The US Civil War erupts in 1861, and the Irish are recruited heavily. Union generals walk into Irish neighbourhoods and promise money, food, and citizenship in exchange for military service. You hesitate. You remember being forced into militias under British command back in Ireland. But here, this might be different. So you enlist. The Irish Brigade is born, units with names like the 69th New York Infantry. They carry green flags into battle alongside the Stars and Stripes. They fight at Antietam, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, often on the front lines. They die in droves. They earn a reputation for bravery and for sacrifice. And when the war ends, something has changed. The Irish aren't just immigrants now, they are veterans, and they're beginning to organise. Politics becomes the next battleground. You join Tammany Hall, the powerful democratic machine in New York. It's corrupt, yes, but it's your corruption. Irish bosses like Honest John Kelly or Richard Croker rise to power by controlling votes, distributing patronage jobs, and building loyalty block by block, street by street. For the first time, you have a voice. You can influence city policy. You can place your cousin in the sanitation department, your brother-in-law in the fire brigade, your son in the police force. You build ladders out of poverty, one rung at a time, and you do it with the memory of the coffin ship still fresh in your mind. But not everyone is happy about your rise. Tensions flare again in the late 19th century. The economy dips, jobs dry up. The same cycle begins, blame the immigrants. The newspapers return to printing caricatures of the Irish as apes or drunks. Protestant elites fund secret societies to protect American values. In Boston, anti-Irish mobs torch Catholic churches, and back in Ireland the famine may have passed, but the scars remain. Entire villages are empty. Over 1 million people have died. Another 1 million have fled. And British policy has not changed. The landlords still own the land. The evictions continue. The struggle for Irish independence simmers on every page of the Gaelic press. So now you send money home, not just for your family, but for the cause. By the 1870s, an invisible bridge stretches across the Atlantic. A bridge made of remittances, letters, and ideology. You in Boston read about uprisings in Cork. You in Chicago donate to Fenian rebels. You in New York print pamphlets calling for land reform in Connaught. The hunger that once sent you fleeing becomes a new hunger, for justice, for restitution, for memory. But even in your new home, that hunger remains complicated, because America gave you survival, but not acceptance. Not yet. You lie awake some nights in your tenement, listening to the sounds of coughing children and distant train whistles. You remember the cold Atlantic air in the belly of the ship, the soft rot in your father's last harvest, the faces of the dead who did not make it. And you wonder, was this the future they hoped for? You made it. You endured. You're building a new life. But is it really yours? Or just borrowed ground? You've lived here for decades now. America is your home. And yet, no matter how long you've stayed, how many bricks you've laid, or ballots you've cast, there's a voice in your blood that never stops whispering. You're still Irish. You live in a world rebuilt from ashes. But the hunger, the real hunger that drove you across the ocean, never fully left you. It just changed its name. You wake up to your grandson reading about the Great Hunger in a school textbook. He looks up, asking, "Did people really starve to death just because of potatoes?" You nod, but you know the answer is far too simple. It wasn't the potatoes, it was everything behind them. It was the centuries of foreign rule, the laws that stripped you of land and language. It was the landlords who exported wheat while your village buried children. It was the silence in Parliament when they heard of your suffering and said, "Let the market handle it." You remember your mother's face when she told you not to cry for your baby sister. There would be no coffin, only a sheet, and a shallow grave near a ditch. You try to explain all this to your grandson, but he's already moved on to his math homework to the next thing, so you sit quietly and remember for him. There is pride in survival, but survival is not the same as healing. You go to Mass on Sunday and hear the hymns you grew up with, now sung in American accents. You buy soda bread from a corner bakery that uses raisins instead of currants. You see green beer on St. Patrick's Day and smile, even though it's a far cry from the sacred day it once was. Everything's changed, but you haven't forgotten. Your children speak no Irish. They don't know what Ngortamore means. They don't remember the taste of nothing, the weight of grief that sat in your chest when you left your homeland for a future you were never promised. You see them thrive in factories, in schools, in courts of law. You see them marry into German and Italian families. They name their children Jacob and Emily, not Sean or Bridget. The pain that once defined your existence has become a footnote in theirs. You're glad. But part of you wonders, who will remember what it cost? There's a quiet revolution happening back in Ireland. The Land League, Home Rule, the Irish Parliamentary Party. You read about them in Irish-language newspapers mailed from Dublin, wrapped in brown paper and twine. Then the Rising comes in 1916. You're too old to fight. But you remember the fire in your youth, the same fire that carried you across the sea. You attend secret meetings in the back of pubs. You collect donations for the cause. You tell stories of hunger not for sympathy but for fuel. You remind the young ones why you left and why it matters that Ireland stands again. And when the Republic is declared, though briefly, you raise a toast, alone, in your kitchen. A candle flickering, a photo of your mother beside a faded ticket from the ship you survived. She never made it, but her hunger lives on, in the freedoms your people still chase. Later in life, you walk past the docks again, not the ones you arrived at. Those are gone now, flattened, buried beneath warehouses and parking lots. But other ships still come, and other immigrants still disembark, blinking into the sunlight of a foreign land. You watch them and feel an old ache stir. Different clothes, different languages, same eyes. You see your younger self in their faces, the same hollow hunger for something more, the same fear that no one will care, the same desperate hope that this new country won't forget them, won't twist them, won't swallow them whole. And you realise the coffin ships never stopped sailing, they just changed direction. And hunger wears many names now. Poverty, war, climate, exile. The Irish famine is over, but famine itself isn't. You leave behind a letter when you go. It isn't addressed to anyone. It's not even signed. It's just a simple note tucked into your Bible. We were not weak. We were not only starving, we were more than victims. We were fire that crossed an ocean and refused to die. And if you carry our name, you carry our hunger. Not just for bread, but for dignity. No one ever reads it. But that's all right. You didn't write it for them. You wrote it for the hunger. You wake before the sun, as always. The air is cool, damp with the Aegean sea breeze that creeps in through the open courtyard. You do not own the bed you slept in, nor the sandals you strap onto your cracked feet. You do not own your name. You used to be called something else, somewhere far away. But that name was stripped from you, just like the gods you once prayed to, and the language you once whispered to your mother. Now, in Athens, you are called Therum. It means hunter, a joke. You do not hunt, you serve. The house you work in is modest by Athenian standards, stone and stucco with olive trees in the garden and mosaics that you scrub clean every week. The master is a metic, a foreign-born resident who cannot vote. Still, he owns you. You, who are less than foreign, less than human. And yet, as the city wakes, roosters crying, street dogs barking, men with voices already raised in debate, you begin your daily walk to the market. The baskets on your shoulders are heavy. but not as heavy as the silence. You walk past statues of gods, past marble colonnades, past the rising hum of civic life. The men are already at it, talking, arguing, reciting law and poetry and war plans, as if words could shape the cosmos. The agora is their theatre. You are invisible. No one stops you. No one looks you in the eye, because you are a slave. Athens calls itself a democracy, a place of reason, liberty, and civic virtue. A city where a man's voice is sacred, where the demos, the people, rule. But you're not people, you are property. You've learned the rules. You speak Greek fluently now, better than some of the free men in the hills. You can name the gods, even if they don't hear you. You know that the city is built on ideals, justice, equality, honour, and that all of those words slide past you like water over stone. In the public squares, men stand on stone platforms to vote. You're not allowed to watch. You're not allowed to dream. Freedom in Athens is reserved for a very specific kind of man. Freeborn, male, not too poor, and certainly not you. There are thousands like you. Domestic slaves, field slaves, silver mine slaves. You have met some of them, shivering, dying men with skin turned grey from the dust of Lorien, where the mines feed the wealth of the empire. You will never see them again. No one does. The state prefers not to notice them. Your master is kind in the way that a man can be kind to an animal he believes belongs to him. He feeds you. He does not beat you unless you break something. He even lets you listen when he hosts his symposiums, gatherings of friends where philosophy and politics flow with wine. You stand by the wall and pour drinks. You hear talk of Plato's Republic, of virtue and reason, of the nature of justice. You listen carefully, and quietly in the darkness of your quarters, you repeat those words to yourself. What is justice? What is a man? What is a soul? The city calls you less than human. But you have a soul, don't you? You think. You remember. You feel pain. You dream. At night, you sometimes imagine a life before Athens, before slavery. You don't remember much. A fire, the sound of shouting, foreign men with swords, a boat, chains. The dreams fade like fog, but the ache remains. In the city, you're useful. That is your only value. You shop for the household. You help tutor the master's son, who laughs at you and asks why a slave knows the names of philosophers. You say nothing. You walk behind the master when he visits the assembly. You cannot enter, but you carry the scrolls, the books, the wax tablets. One day, he speaks before the crowd, passionately defending Athens as a beacon of freedom. The city applauds. You stand in the back, in the dust, holding his cloak. No one notices the irony. You walk home in silence, the sound of applause still ringing in your ears like thunder you'll never touch. Some slaves escape. You've heard the rumours, ones who run into the mountains or stow away on merchant ships bound for Thrace. But the city has patrols, they pay informants, and even if you reach the border, where would you go? Who would give you a name? Besides, freedom is a dangerous word here. A free slave is still marked, branded, shunned, better to endure than vanish. But sometimes, late at night, you think of standing on the Nix Hill and speaking, just once, not to plead, not to beg, but to argue, to speak in your own voice, to matter, to exist. What would you even say? You wouldn't ask for pity, you'd ask the men of Athens to look you in the eyes and explain their democracy to your face. You return to your bed, you stare at the ceiling. The oil lamp flickers. Outside, the city sleeps. But you don't. Because tomorrow you'll wake again before the sun. You'll fetch the water. You'll prepare the bread. You'll serve the boy his lessons. And none of it will be yours. Not the work, not the day, not even your name. And yet the thought lingers. If the city is built on reason, if truth is the highest virtue, then how long can a lie like this go unspoken? The next morning arrives like all others, with the clang of a bronze bell in the courtyard, and the rough command of your master's steward. There is no question of sleeping in. You're already behind. Today the master has guests arriving, wealthy merchants from Euboea. One of them, rumour has it, owns 40 slaves just in his stables. That makes him powerful, not because of his words or his character, but because of how many other people he owns. You're to clean the floors, help the cook, stand behind the guests and refill their wine cups before they realise they're empty. You're not to speak, not even to cough. The kitchen is already filled with heat. Bread bakes in the clay oven, lentils boil in the pot. The cook, another slave, speaks to you without looking up. His hands move without pause. He has done this 1,000 times. "We make the city run," he mutters. It's not a boast, it's a lament. Athens prides itself on its marble temples, its drama, its democracy. But all of that rests on backs like yours, backs bent from lifting amphorae of olive oil, from planting barley, from digging latrines and heaving stone for public works. The citizens speak freely only because someone else does the labour. Without you, there is no leisure. Without you, there is no freedom. You spend the morning chopping onions and scrubbing amphorae until your fingers are raw. At midday, the guests arrive. They're loud, laughing, smelling of wine and perfume and horses. Their sandals leave mud on the floors you just washed. They speak of Sparta, of strategy, of war, of what it means to be truly free. None of them glances at you. You refill their cups, you fold their cloaks. One of them snaps his fingers at you to bring more figs. He doesn't even use your name, just "Boy!" You're 37 years old. Later, the master praises your quiet service. He says you're loyal, useful, obedient, like a favourite dog. That night, after they're gone, you wash the linens and dump the waste from their chamber pots. You clean the floors again, and as you kneel, you think of how easily the city forgets who holds it up. Your quarters are nothing more than a corner of the storage room, blankets on straw. There's no privacy, but you are lucky. Some slaves sleep in the kitchens, others in cages. You share your space with a woman named Marine. She does the weaving, fast, precise, never angry. She's been here longer than you. She speaks rarely, but when she does, her voice cuts through like flint. "Don't let the city into your bones," she says to you once. You don't ask what she means. You already know. If you start believing the things they say, that you're less than them, that your silence is natural, that your mind doesn't matter, you'll never get it back. You see them every day, the citizens, the free men, draped in himatians, strolling through the agora, talking politics, making speeches, debating ethics, quoting Aristotle. They are very proud of their minds, and still, none of them questions the contradiction they live in, a city founded on freedom, built by people who are not free. You know they need you, but they pretend they don't. They say that labour is unfit for a free man, that some people are just meant to be ruled. You've heard the arguments that the soul of a slave is inferior, that you're incapable of reason, that you're like an animal that mimics speech but doesn't understand. But you do understand. You understand more than they think, because you see the rot from the bottom up. At dusk, you walk the perimeter of the house, checking the gates. The light turns golden on the stone. You glance out at the street and see two boys wrestling in the dust. Citizens' sons. They will grow up free. They will go to school, join the army, vote in the assembly. One of them shouts, "I'll be Pericles!" The other says, "No, you're the barbarian. You lose." You wonder who plays the slave. No one wants that part. You turn back inside. The door closes. In this city, everything has its order, you below, them above. And yet, when you lie down that night, your body aching, your mind still turns. You recite the things you've overheard, the laws of Solon, the dialogues of Socrates, the speeches of Demosthenes. You have no scrolls, but your memory is good, better than theirs. One day, you whisper a question to Marine. What would happen if all the slaves stopped working at once? She looks at you, not with surprise, but with a kind of tired amusement. They'd panic, she says. Then they'd kill us. And she's right. The city cannot imagine itself without you, but it also cannot bear to see you. That's why you're ignored, silenced, buried under layers of rhetoric and marble, not because you are powerless, but because your presence is proof of their lie. And deep down, you suspect. Some of them know it. You don't have a name anymore, not one that's used. The master gave you a new name when he purchased you, and the household has shortened it to something quicker, something easier to shout. Your old name, your mother's voice, your village, they've faded into silence. Still, some part of you remains, quiet, watchful. The city talks about greatness, but it's never built on ideals alone. It's built on sweat, on blistered hands and silent labour, on the bodies that never make it into statues. You wake before dawn and head to the fields. You carry baskets of barley on your back. Every step, dust grinds into your sandals. The overseer walks behind, holding a stick. He doesn't strike you, not today. But you remember the last time. Even in this, you are not the worst off. Some slaves are bound to the silver mines at Lorien, beneath the ground where the sun never reaches. They die with their hands blackened, lungs choked with dust. If you are a house slave, you're more visible, but no more free. You hear of one who tried to run once, caught, branded on the forehead with a hot iron, the Greek letter delta for doulos, slave, a mark to show all that he'd forgotten his place. They say he walks with his eyes to the ground now. There are no rights for you. If you're beaten, there is no trial. If you're killed, there is no funeral. You are not property of the city, you are property of one man. And in Athens, a man may do as he likes with what he owns. This is not Sparta, where slaves, called helots, outnumber the citizens and live in constant fear of state-organised cullings. In Athens you are quieter, more hidden, yet still indispensable. You fetch the water, chop the wood, raise the children, lay the roads. But when the assembly gathers to debate justice and liberty, your name is never spoken. You are the one freedom is built on, and the one it erases. Sometimes you go with the master into the city. He walks ahead, his robe spotless. You carry the goods, walk 2 steps behind. Eyes down, you pass philosophers. You hear Socrates ask questions that make other men stumble. He speaks of virtue, of the examined life, of how no one does wrong knowingly. You wonder if he sees you. You wonder if his wisdom has room for people like you. When he is sentenced to die, you hear the news from the cook. The man drank hemlock, she says, talked until the end. You nod, but you know this. The city never punishes itself. Only those who fail to fit within its comfort. One day, there's a rumour. War is coming again. Persia, maybe Thebes. The master gathers his things, speaks nervously, talks about arming citizens and preparing ships. You listen from the corner. You know what war means. They will fight. They will call it noble. You will carry the wood for their siege towers. They will say the city is at stake. You will say nothing. But still, you wonder, if the ships burn, if the enemy walks through the gates, who will remember you? Not the scribes, not the dramatists, not the generals. You will vanish between the cracks of history, like sand poured through an amphora. And yet the city will fall without you. You are the arms that held up the Parthenon, the legs that brought water from the well, the mind that learned in silence, memorized in secret. They called you less than human, but you were always watching. One night, the master hosts a symposium. Wine flows, the air smells of roasted lamb. Men recline on couches and argue over justice. You stand by the wall, refill their craters, and then one man, an orator, drunk and flush-faced, points at you and says, "If this one could speak, perhaps he'd teach us something." Laughter follows. Slaps on the back. Another joke. You smile quietly, not because it's funny, but because you could speak, and if you did, they would not sleep so easily. The Republic is made of words, decrees, laws, ideas, but you're made of flesh, and it is flesh that builds empires. Without you, the agora is empty. The temples crumble. The roads go wild. You are the secret the city hides behind its philosophy, the truth it doesn't put on display. Because if the world saw how Athens runs, if they saw you, it would ruin the dream. But you see it, you live it, and, somewhere, perhaps long after your bones have been dust and your name forgotten, someone might ask, who carried this city when no one else would? And maybe, just maybe, they'll find the answer.